I never loved you, not even once. You were just convenient. He said it out loud, in front of everyone, at his own engagement party while she stood there in a catering uniform holding a tray of champagne like she'd been put there specifically for him to humiliate. Charlotte didn't scream. She didn't throw the tray. She just stood there and let it destroy her. And then a voice came from behind her, low, calm, like a blade wrapped in silk. If she means nothing to you, then she's mine. 200 people went completely silent. If this story moves something and you subscribe, hit that bell and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Charlotte's story travels. I never loved you, not even once. That was what Tom Harrison said to Charlotte Winters at 9:14 on a Friday night in the middle of his own engagement party with a champagne glass in his hand and a smile on his face that she would spend years trying to forget. He didn't whisper it. He didn't look away when he said it. He held her eyes and he said it the way you say something you've been waiting a long time to finally say out loud with relief, like a confession that cost him nothing. And Charlotte heard it, and something inside her cracked straight down the middle. She had known the second she walked through the doors of the Harrington estate that the night was going to break her. She just hadn't known how fast. She had been standing at the check-in table in her black catering uniform when the name caught her eye on the event sheet, Harrison Harrington Engagement Celebration, and her hand had gone completely still on the tray she was holding. Harrison, Tom Harrison, her Tom Harrison. Deja, the other server, had noticed her freeze. You know these people? No, Charlotte said. The word came out immediately, instinctively, the way you refuse something before you've even thought about whether you want it. You sure? Because your face just did something. I'm fine, let's go. And she walked in, because the rent was due in 9 days, because she had picked up the shift specifically to cover it, because she had spent the last 11 months building a version of herself that did not fall apart over Tom Harrison. And she was not about to let one name on an event sheet unravel all of that in the lobby of a mansion. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. She was so completely, catastrophically not fine. The ballroom hit her like a physical force. Not the room itself, but him standing at the far end of it, like he'd been placed there by someone who wanted to make sure she saw him immediately. Tom Harrison, in a perfect dark suit, with a woman beside him who was everything Charlotte was not, effortless and luminous, and entirely at ease in a room full of inherited wealth, her hand resting on Tom's arm like it had always belonged there. Charlotte's tray tilted. She caught it. That's him, isn't it? Deja said quietly beside her. It wasn't a question. Don't, Charlotte said. Charlotte? I said don't. Keep moving. She kept moving. For 37 minutes, she did the impossible. She worked the room. She offered champagne and collected empties and smiled the neutral professional smile that cost her nothing and revealed less, and she stayed to the left side of the ballroom, and she tracked Tom's position the way you track weather, constantly, peripherally, without looking directly at it. She was fine. She was fine. She was fine. And then his eyes found her. Not by accident. She could feel the moment it happened, a shift in the air, a pressure at the back of her neck, and she looked up before she could stop herself, and Tom Harrison was looking straight at her from across the room. He smiled. That smile, she knew that smile. The one that said, I see exactly what you are, and I've already decided it doesn't matter. He said something to the woman beside him. The woman, his fiancée, laughed softly and looked across the room in Charlotte's direction, and Charlotte felt her face go hot. She turned away sharply. She moved toward the service entrance. She moved with purpose, with speed, her whole body focused on getting through those doors and into the hallway where she could breathe and think and remember who she was and why she had come here, and why none of him had any power over her anymore. Charlotte, she stopped. Her body stopped before her mind did, responding to his voice the way it had been trained to over 3 years, immediately, completely, without question. She hated herself for it. She turned around slowly. Tom Harrison stood 4 feet away, champagne glass in hand, completely relaxed. Like running into his ex-girlfriend at his engagement party, the ex-girlfriend he was paying to serve as guest was the most natural thing in the world. Didn't know they'd send you, he said pleasantly. Tom, you look tired. I'm working. Right. He glanced at her uniform, at her tray, at the whole precise picture of where she had ended up in the 11 months since he'd left her, and she watched him assess it all and find it exactly where he'd expected it to be. Of course you are. I need to get back to, come meet Vivian, Tom. But his hand was already at her elbow, steering her back through the crowd, and Charlotte went because making a scene would cost her the shift, and the shift would cost her the rent, and she had been calculating the price of her own dignity for so long, it had become second nature. Tom knew that. He had always known exactly what her calculations were. That was the thing about people who know you deeply, they know precisely where to apply pressure. Vivian Harrington was gracious in the way that very wealthy women are gracious, warmly, expertly, in a way that made you feel welcome right up until the moment you realized the warmth was a performance and you were the audience. The Charlotte, she said, extending her hand, Tom mentioned you. He said you were a tremendous support during a difficult period. A tremendous support during a difficult period. $14,000, every Sunday she'd ever had. The job offer in Seattle she'd turned down because Tom said he needed her. The argument with her sister she'd never fully repaired because Tom hadn't liked her sister's opinion of him. The slow, incremental dismantling of every version of herself that existed independently of him, all of it filed under a difficult period. That's generous, Charlotte said, and her voice came out perfectly level. Tom's eyes flickered. He recognized the tone. He knew that voice, the voice she used when she was holding something back at considerable personal cost. Charlotte was very good at knowing what I needed, Tom said. And there it was, the first blade slipped in under the warmth of the conversation, clean and almost invisible. She had a talent for it. Tom, Charlotte said quietly, I mean it as a compliment. You don't. Vivian's smile held, but her eyes sharpened. Tom tilted his head. I'm just saying you always knew your place in my life. That's not nothing. Most people don't have that kind of clarity about where they stand. My place, Charlotte repeated. Yes. His voice was still light, still pleasant, still performing for Vivian, still executing the particular cruelty of a man who is very good at hurting people in public while making it look like ordinary conversation. You were convenient, Charlotte. We were good for each other for a while. But I never, he paused, looked at her, made a decision. I never felt what I feel for Vivian. What I feel for you was never love. I think you knew that. I think you always knew that, and you just needed someone to finally say it out loud. The silence between them lasted exactly 1 second. Then Charlotte's tray tilted. Not from grief, or not only grief, but a grief. Something else moved through her, something that had been compressed and sealed for 11 months, something hot and old and very, very done, and it moved through her hands and the tray went sideways, and 3 champagne flutes left the edge and hit the marble floor, and the sound, the crack of it, the shatter rang through the room like a bell. Heads turned. The nearby circle of conversation died. Tom stepped back. In the sudden, excruciating quiet with broken glass at her feet and 50 pairs of eyes on her face, Charlotte stood completely still. And Tom Harrison looked at her, surrounded by the wreckage in her uniform at his party, and he said loud enough for the people around them to hear, "Oh, Charlotte, you were always just a little too much." The laughter started. 2 people first, then more. A ripple that spread outward through the crowd, and Charlotte felt it move across her skin like something physical, and she could not move. She could not speak. She could not find the floor beneath her feet. "Someone clean that up," Tom said, and turned back to his fiancée. And then every single sound in the room stopped. Not faded, stopped, instantaneously. As if someone had pressed a button. Charlotte didn't understand it at first. She was still staring at the glass on the floor, still trying to find the instructions for how to make her legs work, when she felt a presence just behind her left shoulder. Close, warm, utterly still. She turned. The man standing beside her was tall, not theatrically so, but in the way that some people are simply built to occupy more space than others. Dark suit, no tie, dark hair, and a face that was absolutely, completely expressionless. Not cold, not angry, just controlled. Controlled in the way of someone who has never in his entire life needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was looking at Tom Harrison, and Tom Harrison had gone pale. Not embarrassed pale, scared pale. The men nearest to them had stepped back. Charlotte didn't know when it had happened. It was simply that the circle had widened and no one was laughing anymore. and every person in the immediate vicinity was looking at this man the way you look at something that has just revealed itself to be significantly more dangerous than it first appeared. Victor, Tom said. The name came out wrong. Too thin. Too careful. The man Victor didn't look at Tom. He was looking at Charlotte, and the expression in his eyes was unreadable, but not an empty, and Charlotte had the disorienting sensation of being seen, actually fully seen for the first time in a very long time. "Are you all right?" he asked her. His voice was quiet. Quieter than she expected from a man who had just silenced 200 people by walking into a room. Her voice cracked slightly. She pressed it flat. "I'm fine." "No," he said. Simple, certain. "You're not." Tom made a sound, half laugh, half warning. "Victor, this is private. This is just she's my ex. It was a conversation between us, nothing more." Victor looked at Tom then, just looked at him. For 5 full seconds, and in those 5 seconds, Charlotte watched Tom Harrison, a man she had never once seen back down from anything, shrink. "Private conversations," Victor said, "don't end with people laughing." "She's nobody to me," Tom said, and the words were a mistake the moment they left his mouth, and something in Victor's stillness sharpened at the edges. "Nobody, Paul," Victor repeated. "She's my ex. Tom stopped. Something in Victor's expression warned him. Victor turned back to Charlotte. "If she's nobody to you, he said, and his voice was very, very quiet, "then she's mine." The words detonated in the silence. Charlotte stopped breathing. Mine. The word hit her somewhere below, reason below defense, in the place where you keep the things you've stopped letting yourself want. Not because she needed to belong to anyone. She'd spent 3 years belonging to Tom Harrison, and she knew exactly how that ended, but because the word had been said by someone who sounded like he meant it with his whole body. Tom stepped forward. "You don't know her." "I know enough." Victor's eyes hadn't moved from Charlotte. "I know that what just happened to her in this room was wrong. I know that you know it too. And I know that every person in here is waiting to see what you're going to do about it." The silence held. Tom looked around the room, at the faces watching him, at Vivian, whose expression had quietly rearranged itself into something unreadable. He said nothing. Victor reached into his jacket pocket, unhurried like a man who has all the time in the world, and produced a card. He set it on Charlotte's tray. Then he looked at the catering manager across the room, and something passed between them wordlessly, and the manager nodded. "She's done for the evening," Victor said. "Make sure she's paid in full." Then he looked at Charlotte. "Drink this," he said, picking up a champagne flute from a passing tray and holding it out to her. "And then walk with me." Charlotte looked at the glass, at the card on her tray, at this stranger with the quiet voice and the name that had emptied the room. "I don't know you," she said. "You don't," he agreed, "but you know him. And right now, that's a good enough reason." From behind her, she heard Tom say her name. Sharp, possessive. The voice of a man who has realized someone is taking something he decided he no longer wanted and can't stand the idea of someone else having it. "Charlotte," Victor turned, barely, just enough. Tom stopped mid-word. Charlotte looked at Victor Moretti, this stranger, this man who had walked out of nowhere and planted himself between her and the worst moment of her life. And she thought, "I don't know what you are. I don't know what you want. I don't know what comes next." She picked up the champagne glass. "All right," she said. Something moved at the edge of Victor's expression, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the shape of something that might eventually become warmth. "All right," he said quietly. She set down the tray. She left the broken glass exactly where it had fallen on Tom Harrison's marble floor, and she walked out of the room. The March air outside the Harrington estate hit her like cold water, sharp, and clarifying, the kind of cold that cuts through shock and makes the world feel real again. Charlotte stood on the stone steps and breathed. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold, the shaking was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere that had been holding very tight for a very long time and had finally, without permission, let go. Victor stood 2 steps below her, his phone at his ear, speaking quietly. Not English, something else, something with a harder edge beneath its rhythm. He spoke for less than 30 seconds. Then he hung up and looked back at her. "Car's coming," he said. "I drove myself," Charlotte said. "Your car will be brought to you." "Where do you want it?" She blinked. "How would you?" She stopped, looked at him. really looked at him, the certainty in how he stood, the way the estate staff had moved around him all evening like water around a stone. "Who are you, Victor Moretti?" The name landed with weight, like she should recognize it and didn't, but like some part of her recognized the shape of it, the way the room had reacted to it, the way Tom's voice had changed. "Victor Moretti," she said slowly, "and you did what you just did in there because it was the right thing," he said. "And because Tom Harrison has owed me a conversation for some time, tonight gave me a reason to have it." Charlotte stared at him. "So I was useful to you." The word came out before she could catch it. Convenient. Useful. The words that had been carving through her all night. Something moved across Victor's face, quick then gone. "No," he said, sharp, final, unlike anything Tom Harrison had ever sounded like. "You were in front of me when something wrong was happening." "That's different." She held his gaze, searching for the lie in it, because there was always a lie, always an angle, always a cost she couldn't see yet. Men like this didn't step in front of women they didn't know for free. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Right now, to make sure you're all right. And after right now, let's get through right now first." The black car appeared at the end of the drive. Charlotte looked at it, then at Victor, then back at the doors of the Harrington estate behind which she knew Tom was explaining her to those 200 people. Explaining this, reframing it into something that made him the reasonable one. She thought about going back in, apologizing for the glasses, filing her incident report, being small and careful and sensible the way she always was. Then she thought, "I never loved you." Not even once. She turned toward the car. "For the record," she said, "I want it noted that I'm fully aware this is probably the worst decision I've ever made." Victor's mouth moved just barely, the very beginning of something. "Noted," he said, and he opened the door. She got in, and the last thing she saw as the car pulled away from the Harrington estate was the light from the ballroom windows, warm and gold and full of people who had laughed at her. She didn't look back. But somewhere in that building, Tom Harrison was watching the car disappear. And for the first time all evening, he was not smiling. And Victor Moretti, sitting one measured foot away from her in the back seat, was already making another call, quiet, brief, in that language she still couldn't quite place. Charlotte pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them shaking. She had no idea who this man was. She had no idea what she had just agreed to. But she was beginning to suspect, with the particular instinct of someone who has finally, after a very long time, made a decision that is entirely, dangerously, irreversibly their own, that finding out was going to change everything. The car was warm and it smelled like leather and something else, cedar maybe, or something darker. And Charlotte sat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs and stared at the city moving past outside the window, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she was in a car with a man whose last name she had learned 12 minutes ago and whose first name had made Tom Harrison go pale. She was not succeeding. Victor sat on his side of the back seat, one measured foot of space between them, exactly maintained like a boundary he had drawn and intended to keep, and he was on his phone again, speaking quietly in that language she still couldn't place. Not quite Italian, something adjacent to it, something that sounded like it had sharper edges underneath the vowels. He hung up. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of someone who was completely at ease, saying nothing, and Charlotte, who had spent her entire life filling silences because silence made her nervous, felt the specific tension of wanting to speak and having nothing she trusted herself to say. Victor spoke first. "Are you hungry?" Charlotte blinked. Of all the things she had imagined him saying, that was not one of them. "What? You worked a catering shift." He glanced at her briefly. "You were serving food for 2 hours. Did you eat?" "That's no, I didn't, but that's not..." She stopped, shook her head slightly. "That's not really the most pressing question right now." "It is actually," he said. "Everything else can wait 20 minutes. Hunger makes everything worse." She stared at him. "You just claimed me in front of 200 people like I don't even know, like I was something you could just, and now you're asking if I've eaten." "Yes." "That's insane." "Probably," he said it without any particular concern. "Are you hungry or not?" Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, and then against every instinct she had, she said, "Yes, fine, I'm starving." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she noticed it, and noticing it made her feel strange, and feeling strange made her angry, and being angry felt she realized significantly better than being humiliated, so she held on to it. Good, Victor said, and picked up his phone again. She watched him type something, a single line quick, no hesitation, and then set the phone down on the seat between them. Where are we going? She asked. My place. The words landed with weight, and Charlotte felt her whole body tighten. Excuse me? He looked at her then, directly steadily without the flinching or the deflection she was used to from men who had said things they didn't entirely mean. My restaurant. I own a restaurant. It's closed tonight, but the kitchen is still staffed. It's quiet. You won't have to talk to anyone you don't want to talk to. Charlotte held his gaze for a moment, searching for the subtext, looking for the version of this that ended the way she already suspected it might end. Because she was not naive, she knew what men offered when they said come somewhere quiet. She knew the currency of that particular transaction. But his face was even, steady, entirely infuriatingly unreadable. And if I said I wanted to go home, she asked, then I'd have the driver take you home, he said simply. Right now, if you want. She didn't say anything. Charlotte? He said her name without drama, without the weight Tom had always given it, not like a tool, not like a verdict, just like a name. I'm not going to hurt you. If at any point tonight you want to leave, you leave. That's not a negotiation. She believed him. That was the part that scared her, how immediately, instinctively she believed him. She had spent 3 years not believing Tom Harrison and knowing she didn't believe him and doing it anyway. And now here was a man she had known for 40 minutes, and every cell in her body was saying, this one tells the truth, and she did not trust that instinct at all. Fine, she said, but I want to know who you are. You will, he said. Give me 20 minutes. Why 20 minutes? Because he said some things are better explained when no one is shaking. Charlotte looked down at her hands. They were still trembling, finely, barely perceptibly, but trembling. She pressed them flat against her thighs again. I'm not shaking, she said. Victor looked at her hands, then back at her face. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The restaurant was on the north side of the city, in a building that looked from the outside like nothing at all. A dark facade, no sign, just an address and small metal numbers beside a door that a man in a black coat opened before Victor's car had even fully stopped. The inside was warm and low-lit and completely empty of customers, the table set but unoccupied, the whole space holding the specific quiet of somewhere that has very recently been full of people and is now waiting to be again. Victor led her to a table in the back corner, not a gesture of secrecy she sensed, but of habit. He sat with his back to the wall. She noticed that. She noticed him notice her noticing. Old habit, he said without her asking. Of people who expect trouble, she said. He didn't deny it. A woman appeared 40s, dark hair, pulled back, the efficient warmth of someone who has worked for the same person long enough to read the room without being told what she's reading. She set down water bread, 2 glasses of wine, and was gone before Charlotte had finished registering her presence. Charlotte picked up the bread because her hands needed something to do, and she was in fact genuinely starving. Victor watched her eat with the patient, focused attention of someone who has nowhere else to be and no performance to maintain. You said you'd explain, Charlotte said. I did. So explain. He set his wine glass down, leaned back slightly in his chair, and he said, what do you know about the Moretti family? Charlotte felt the shift in the air, the way a conversation changes register when the real subject finally arrives. Nothing, she said honestly. That's actually good, he said. It means Tom never told you how deep his situation actually goes. She went still. What situation? Victor looked at her for a moment. Then Tom Harrison has owed my family $4.3 million for 14 months. The money came through a business arrangement that Tom entered into voluntarily and enthusiastically and has been attempting to exit from equally, enthusiastically, significantly less successfully ever since. The bread in Charlotte's hand became irrelevant. She set it down. $4 million, she stopped. Reset. Tom doesn't have $4 million. He did briefly when he borrowed it. Tom borrowed money from the mafia. Victor's expression shifted, a fine crack in the evenness, something that was almost amusement. That's the first time you've said that word tonight. I've been thinking it since the moment you walked into the room, she said flatly. Then you're smarter than most people who meet me. I'm going to need you to tell me why any of this has anything to do with me. Because Victor said, and his voice dropped half a register, when Tom couldn't pay, and he can't pay, the Harrington engagement is a last-ditch attempt to access her family's money before my patience runs out entirely. He offered us something else. Charlotte waited. He offered us information, Victor said, about where certain funds had been moved, certain accounts that were now technically in someone else's name. Someone who wouldn't know what she was holding. The table between them was very quiet. Me, Charlotte said. The word came out flat and hollow. He told us your name 6 weeks ago, Victor said. He was watching her face carefully, the way you watch someone's face when you're delivering something heavy and you need to know the exact moment it lands. He told us you were a bookkeeper, that you'd signed documents for him, financial documents, without fully understanding what they were. Charlotte felt the floor shift beneath her. She thought about the documents. There had been several over 3 years. Tom always came to her with papers needing signatures, just administrative stuff. Babe, you know how lawyers are. And she had signed them because she trusted him because he was her partner, because questioning him had always felt like questioning herself. What documents? Her voice came out very controlled, very tight. Documents that, if read a certain way by a certain audience, would suggest that you were a knowing participant in the movement of borrowed funds into personal accounts. The room tilted. He used me, she said. Not a question, not even fully a statement, just 3 words that she was saying out loud so her brain would accept them as real. Yes, Victor said, simply, honestly. The whole time she stopped, pressed her hand flat against the table because the world was spinning slightly and she needed something solid. He called me convenient, she said. At the party, he said I was convenient, and I thought he was being cruel. I didn't think he meant it more specifically than you knew, Victor said quietly. Charlotte looked up wide on, and the anger that hit her then was different from anything she'd felt at the party cleaner, and colder, and absolutely enormous. A kind of fury so total it went past heat into something that felt almost like clarity. You knew all of this, she said. You knew it before tonight. Yes. So when you walked over to me at the party, I walked over because what he did to you publicly was wrong, Victor said. What I just told you would have found its way to you through different means regardless. But yes, I knew who you were before tonight. I've known for 5 weeks. The silence between them was different now. She could feel it, the specific texture of a silence that is sitting on top of something enormous. Then let me ask you again, Charlotte said, and her voice was very quiet and very precise. What do you want from me? Victor met her eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something move across his face that was fully human, not performed, not controlled, not the careful stillness he wore like a second skin. Something that might have been, if she were reading it correctly, discomfort. I want you to know the truth, he said, all of it, before someone else gets there first with a different version. And the version you're giving me right now is that the whole truth. A pause, 1 beat too long. Most of it, he said, her eyes narrowed. What's the part that isn't? He looked at her steadily. And then he said, the documents Tom gave us to keep as leverage have your signature on them, Charlotte. Which means right now, if my family chose to use them, you could be held legally accountable for things Tom did. My family hasn't made that choice. But the option exists. The world went very still. So I'm not a guest, she said slowly. I'm collateral. Victor's jaw tightened. You're not collateral. I don't operate that way. But someone in your family does. He didn't answer, which was she was learning the way Victor Moretti said yes without lying. Charlotte sat with it, with all of it. The documents, Tom's calculation, the 3 years she had spent being slowly, methodically positioned as a liability someone else could cash in. She sat with the stunning, clarifying humiliation of understanding finally the full architecture of what had been done to her. And then she said, tell me what you actually need from me. No more warm-up, no more managing. Tell me exactly what this is. Victor looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, not opened exactly but unlocked, like a door that had been tested from the outside and had not given way, and the person testing it had for the first time considered what it might mean that it was still holding. I need those documents discredited, he said. Tom gave them to us as leverage against himself, proof that he could offer us something worth waiting for. If it comes out that those documents were obtained through coercion and forgery, which they were, they're worthless to both sides. Tom loses his leverage. My family loses a tool they were prepared to use unethically. You get your name off of something that should never have had your name on it. And in exchange, you tell me everything you remember about what you signed. Dates, descriptions, anything. We build a case that those documents are fraudulent. Tom goes down for what he actually did, not for what he pinned on you. Charlotte breathed in, out. And what do you get? She said. Tom Harrison stops being a problem, Victor said, for everyone. She studied him, the steadiness of him, the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting to see if the other person will catch up to it. This is a lot, she said, to believe, from a man I met an hour ago. I know. You could be lying to me. This whole thing could be a different kind of trap. Yes, he said. It could. That's not very reassuring. I know that too. He leaned forward slightly, and she felt the shift in the space between them, not threatening, not romantic, just the particular gravity of someone who is choosing to be entirely direct. I can't make you trust me. I'm not going to try to. What I can do is put everything I just told you in writing, signed before you agree to anything. You take it to a lawyer of your choosing, not one of mine, and you have it reviewed. And if at any point the story doesn't hold, you walk. Charlotte looked at him. The offer was reasonable, more than reasonable. It was the kind of offer that people made when they were trying to actually be honest, not the kind that dressed itself up as honesty while hiding the knife behind its back. She had spent 3 years not knowing the difference. She was very aware of that. Okay, she said quietly, but I have conditions. Victor's eyes sharpened slightly. Tell me. First, those documents, the ones with my signature. I want copies of everything Tom gave you. Everything, not your version of it. The actual papers. Done. Second, I'm not doing anything that puts me in a room alone with Tom Harrison. Whatever this process looks like, he doesn't get access to me. Agreed without reservation. Third, she stopped, swallowed. Third, I need to know what you are to me in this. Because you said in that ballroom in front of every single person in that room, you said I was yours. And I need to know what that actually meant, because that is not a word you get to just say and then act like it was rhetorical. Victor was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has weight. In that room, he said carefully, it meant that you were under my protection. That no one in that room, including Tom, would touch you or speak to you the way he had been speaking to you. That's what I meant in that moment. And outside that room, another pause. His eyes held hers. Outside that room, he said, it means whatever you choose it to mean. Charlotte felt the words land somewhere complicated in her chest. She pressed them back, flattened them, filed them under deal with later because she could not afford to feel them. Right now. Could not afford to be moved by a voice and a steadiness, and a man who had done something no one had done for her in 3 years, stepped in front of her when she was falling, because that was exactly the kind of thing she had always been weak for, and she was not going to be weak for it again. Fine, she said. Then I want to start tonight. The documents. Tell me what you need to know. Victor looked at her, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name, something that wasn't strategy or calculation, something that landed in a register she wasn't ready for. Tonight, he said, you eat, you breathe, you let the last 2 hours settle. I don't need Charlotte. His voice was firm and quiet and left no room for argument. Tom Harrison spent 3 years taking things from you without asking. Tonight, take 1 hour for yourself. The documents will still exist in an hour. As she opened her mouth, closed it. She picked up her wine glass. She drank. And across the table, Victor Moretti watched her with an expression she was only beginning to learn how to read. And somewhere underneath the stillness and the control and the very great danger of what he was, there was something that looked almost like relief that she was still sitting there. She noticed it. She filed it away. She was not done being careful. She was not done being smart. But she was beginning to think with the particular terrifying, impossible clarity of someone who has just survived the worst night of their life and come out the other side holding something unexpected, that careful and smart might this time be pointing her in a direction she had never let herself go before. And outside somewhere across the city, Tom Harrison was making phone calls. And the documents with Charlotte's signature were sitting in a file in a building she had never been to. And the night was far from over. The hour Victor had promised her stretched into 2, and Charlotte didn't notice until the woman who had brought the bread reappeared with a second glass of wine, and she realized looking up that the restaurant had gone completely dark outside the windows, and her phone was showing 11:47 p.m. She had been talking for 2 hours. Not the way she usually talked, carefully, strategically editing herself as she went, offering versions of the truth that were slightly safer than the actual truth. She had been talking the way she used to talk before Tom, before she'd learned to make herself small and palatable and easy to manage. She had been talking like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had just been offered for no reason she could fully explain a flat surface to set it down on. And Victor had listened. That was the thing she couldn't entirely process, how completely he had listened. Not in the way of a man gathering information, not with the particular alertness of someone cataloging what she said for later use, though she couldn't rule that out, and she was not naive enough to. But with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had decided that what she was saying mattered and had arranged everything else in his life accordingly. It was, she realized, the most dangerous thing about him. More dangerous than the name. More dangerous than the way rooms rearranged themselves around his presence. More dangerous than the documents and the money and the $4.3 million Tom Harrison owed to a family that did not extend his patience indefinitely. The most dangerous thing about Victor Moretti was that he made her feel like someone worth listening to. She set her wine glass down. I signed 7 documents, she said, over about 18 months. The first one was in March 2 years ago. Tom told me it was a contractor agreement. He was renovating a property. He said he needed a secondary signatory for the insurance. I didn't think twice. And the others? He spaced them out, never more than one every 2 months. Always a different explanation: business or registration, tax filing, loan modification. I'm a bookkeeper, Victor. I understand financial documents. I should have. She stopped. You trusted him, Victor said. That is not an excuse. No, he said, it's not, but it's also not a crime. It might be, she said, depending on what those documents actually say. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then, the first 3 are relatively clean, minor structural issues, but nothing a good attorney couldn't argue as innocent error. The 4th one, he paused, and in that pause, Charlotte felt her stomach drop. The 4th document transferred nominal signatory authority over a holding account. The account was used after your signature to move borrowed funds in a way that obscured their origin. The room felt very still. How much? She asked. $800,000. Charlotte put both hands flat on the table. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She did it twice because once wasn't enough. He used my signature to launder $800,000, she said. The word launder is accurate, she said sharply. Don't soften it. If it walks like laundering and it looks like laundering, then it's laundering and my name is on it. Victor didn't flinch at her sharpness. He absorbed it the way he absorbed everything steadily, without pushback, without the defensive recalibration she was used to from men who needed her to be calm before they could stay calm. Your name is on it, he confirmed, which is why I'm telling you before someone else does. Someone like who? He held her gaze. There are people in my family, Charlotte, who believe that the fastest way to collect from Tom Harrison is to give law enforcement a reason to look at him. The documents would do that, but they would also in the process give law enforcement a reason to look at you. The full implication took 3 seconds to land. When it did, it landed like a stone dropped from a very great height. Your family was going to use me as leverage against Tom, she said. Not just to hold over him. Actually use me. Turn the documents over and let me take the fall alongside him. Victor's jaw tightened. There was a discussion before I became aware of the full picture. And now that you're aware of the full picture, that discussion is over, he said. Flat, final, the way he said things when they were done. Charlotte stared at him, at the absolute certainty in his face, and she thought about what it meant that someone in a room somewhere in this family, with this name and this reach, had looked at a piece of paper with her signature on it and seen not a person but a tool, and that Victor Moretti had walked into Tom Harrison's engagement party and looked at her and seen something else. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why did you stop it? The discussion. Why does it matter to you what happens to me?" Something moved across his face, quick and complicated, and gone before she could map it. "Because you didn't do anything wrong," he said. "That's not a reason. That's a principle. People don't overturn family decisions for principles." He looked at her for a long moment, and then very quietly, "My mother's name was on a document once. She didn't know what she was signing either." The silence that followed was total. Charlotte did not push. She had enough instinct left to recognize the kind of sentence that comes with a door attached to it, open slightly briefly, not wide enough to enter, but enough to see that there was something on the other side that was real. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago," Victor said. The words were even and closed, and she understood they were the end of that particular thread. She nodded. "Let it go." "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now I need everything you remember about those 7 documents. Every detail where you signed, who was present, whether Tom explained what you were signing before or after you'd already done it. The pattern of how he approached you each time. I have an attorney who specializes in exactly this kind of case. Not a family attorney, independent, clean, no connection to us. And Tom Harrison is going to be given a choice," Victor said. "In approximately 72 hours. What kind of choice?" "The kind he won't enjoy making," Victor said simply. "But that's not your concern right now." Charlotte looked at him. "It is actually, because whatever choice Tom makes in 72 hours has a direct impact on whether I spend the next year fighting fraud charges I had nothing to do with." Victor paused. Then he said, "You're right. I apologize." She blinked. She hadn't expected the apology. She hadn't expected it at all. "Tom will be presented with a full accounting of his debt," Victor said. "In exchange for the debt being restructured, more time-manageable terms, he will sign a sworn statement attesting that the documents he provided were obtained without your knowledge or consent, that your signatures were coerced under false pretenses, and that any legal liability arising from those documents rests solely with him. And if he refuses, then the alternative terms are considerably less comfortable," Victor said. "And Tom knows it." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, working through it, turning it over. "This is still your family exerting control over a situation," she said. "The outcome might be better for me, but the mechanism is the same. You're still using leverage to get what you want." "Yes," Victor said, no hesitation, no attempt to dress it differently. "You're not going to apologize for that part." "No," he said, "that part is what I am. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." And that specific honesty, the refusal to perform a better version of himself for her benefit, was the thing that tilted something in Charlotte's chest in a direction she hadn't given it permission to tilt. She looked down at her wine glass. She looked back up at him. "Okay," she said, "tell me what you need to know." They worked for an hour and a half. Victor had a notepad, actual paper, actual pen, which surprised her, and he wrote things down as she talked his handwriting, small and precise, and completely illegible from where she was sitting. She walked him through every document she could remember. Date, location, Tom's framing, how much time she'd had to read it, who else had been present. For the March document, she remembered it specifically because they had been in Tom's car in a parking garage, and he had told her the notary was waiting, and they were late, and she had signed without reading it fully, because there was always a notary waiting, and they were always late, and in 3 years she had never once thought to ask why the urgency was always manufactured. Victor's pen stopped moving when she said that. "He had it notarized on the spot," he said. "There was someone in the car with us, a man I didn't know. Tom introduced him as his attorney." "Describe him." She did. Victor wrote it down and underlined something twice. "What?" she asked. "That man is not an attorney," Victor said. "I know who that is." "Who is he?" "Someone who has notarized a very significant number of fraudulent documents for a very small number of people," Victor said. "His name on your documents, that's the thread. That's what unravels the whole thing." Charlotte felt something shift in her chest, the particular almost physical sensation of a weight beginning to lift. Not gone. Not even close to gone. but moving, rearranging. The terrible suffocating mass of the last 2 hours was shifting into something that had edges that could be defined, that was possibly maybe something that could be fought. You can prove it, she said. I can prove he's not an attorney, Victor said. I can prove he has a history of fraudulent notarization. Combined with your account of the circumstances and the pattern across all 7 documents, yes, I can build a case that dismantles Tom's leverage entirely. Charlotte breathed, and then her phone rang. She looked down at it. The name on the screen hit her like a bucket of cold water. Tom Harrison. She looked up at Victor. He had seen the name, she could tell by the way his eyes sharpened, the slight straightening of his posture. You don't have to answer, he said. I know, she said. She picked up the phone. She answered it. Tom's voice was different from how it had been at the party. The ease was gone, the pleasant cruelty, the comfortable contempt. What replaced it was tighter, more controlled. The voice of a man who has been doing calculations and doesn't entirely like where they've landed. Charlotte, he said, where are you? That's not your business, Tom. Who you're with is absolutely my business when... It's not, she said. Not anymore. You made that very clear tonight. A pause, she could hear him breathing. Listen to me very carefully, Tom said. Victor Moretti is not what he's pretending to be to you. Whatever he's told you tonight, whatever story he's given you about me, about documents, about what's happening, he has his own agenda. You're not a person to him. You're a move on a board. Charlotte looked across the table at Victor. Victor was watching her face with that same focused, unreadable attention, making no attempt to indicate what she should say. Okay, she said to Tom. Okay, Tom's voice tightened. That's all you have to say. What do you want me to say? I want you to be smart about this. Victor Moretti is dangerous. The people around him are dangerous. You walking out of that party with him was the worst decision you have ever made, and you need to, Tom. She said his name quietly, without heat, without the trembling she would have expected from herself an hour ago. You signed my name to fraudulent financial documents. You used me as cover for money you borrowed from organized crime. You introduced me to a fake notary in a parking garage and watched me sign my name to something that could have destroyed my life. And then tonight, in front of 200 people, you looked me in the eye and told me I was convenient. Silence on the line. So I want you to understand, she continued, still quietly, still steady, that whatever warning you are calling to give me, I need you to understand that you are the last person on earth whose judgment I am interested in right now. She heard Tom exhale, a sharp, frustrated sound. You don't know what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, Charlotte said, for the first time in 3 years. She hung up. She set the phone face down on the table. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that specifically the absence of the trembling that had been with her all evening. Her hands were completely, absolutely still. Victor looked at her for a moment. You all right? Better than I've been all night, she said. Something moved across his face, that almost smile, the one she was beginning to recognize as the closest thing he had to an expression of genuine warmth. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then his own phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Not dramatically, Victor Moretti did nothing dramatically, but something tightened around his eyes, something that was not the focused steadiness he wore with her. This was different, harder. The face of a man who has just seen something he expected and was not looking forward to. I need to take this, he said. Take it. He stepped away from the table, not far, maybe 10 feet, but far enough that she couldn't hear the words, only the low rhythm of his voice. She watched his body language without meaning to. Shoulders slightly drawn, weight forward on the balls of his feet. His free hand at his side, fingers not quite loose. He came back to the table in 4 minutes. He sat. He looked at her. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I need you to hear it before you hear it from someone else. Charlotte felt the familiar precursor to impact the tightening of the world right before something hits it. Tell me, she said, Tom Harrison made a call tonight after you left the party. He reached out to someone who works with my family, not for with, a separate arrangement, an arrangement that I was not fully informed about. What kind of arrangement? Victor's jaw tightened. Tom offered this person something in exchange for making the situation with my family, with the debt, go away. Not money, something else. What? He offered you, Victor said. He told them that you have records, records he gave you knowingly or not records, that document transactions my family would very much prefer remain undocumented. He told them you've had these records for 2 years and you don't know what they are. Charlotte stared at him. Do you, Victor said, have records, files, documents, anything Tom might have given you for safekeeping? Her mind went somewhere very specific, very fast. A USB drive, small black unlabeled. Tom had given it to her 14 months ago. Just hold on to this for me. I'm reorganizing my home office and I don't want it getting mixed up with work files. She had put it in the small, fireproof box she kept at the back of her closet alongside her passport and her birth certificate and her mother's death certificate, and she had forgotten about it almost immediately because Tom was always reorganizing something and asking her to hold things, and she had never once considered Charlotte, Victor said quietly. Do you have something? She looked at him. She thought about trust, about the cost of it, about what it had already cost her. She thought about Tom's voice on the phone. He has his own agenda. You're not a person to him. And she thought about the way Victor had sat across from her for 2 hours and written things down on a notepad and poured her wine and told her things he didn't have to tell her. She thought about his mother's name on a document. She made a decision. There's a USB drive, she said, at my apartment. Tom gave it to me 14 months ago. I don't know what's on it. Victor was very still. I need you to go get it, he said. Right now, tonight. Why tonight? Because he said, and his voice was very quiet and very controlled, in the way of someone managing something urgent without letting it become panic. If Tom has told the person he called that you have it, and that person has passed that information up the chain, there may be people moving toward your apartment right now who are not me and do not have your interests in mind. The heir left the room. You're serious, Charlotte said. I am never not serious, Victor said. He was already on his feet, already reaching for his phone. We go now. My driver takes us. We're 20 minutes from your place. Charlotte stood, her chair scraped back. If something happens to me, she started. Nothing will happen to you, Victor said. Firm, absolute. You can't promise that. He looked at her directly, fully, with that complete and total attention that she was beginning to understand was the rarest thing about him. I can promise, he said, that if anything tries to happen to you, it will have to go through me first. It was not a romantic declaration. It was not meant to be. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same plainness as everything else he said, and it hit her somewhere below logic and above fear, in the place where you keep the things you've stopped letting yourself want. She grabbed her jacket off the back of the chair. 20 minutes, she said. 18, Victor said. He was already at the door. The drive to her apartment was the fastest 18 minutes of Charlotte's life, and also in the particular suspended time way of moments that are actually significant, the slowest. She sat in the back of the car with her hands flat on her thighs and her mind moving through everything. The party, the documents, the notary in the parking garage, the USB drive sitting in her fireproof box for 14 months untouched, and she thought about how a life could be built on something rotten. Without your knowledge, how you could stand on ground that was hollow all the way through and never know it until the moment you put your full weight on the wrong spot. Victor was on his phone for most of the drive. 2 different calls. Brief low in that language she was beginning to think was not Italian, but something close to it, something that shared the vowels but had harder consonants underneath. He hung up 2 blocks from her building and turned to her. There's a car outside your building, he said, dark blue sedan. It was there when my person drove past 5 minutes ago. Charlotte felt her body go cold. Is it them? She asked. Possibly, he said. Possibly not. We don't go in until I know. That's my apartment. I know. That drive has been sitting in my closet for over a year and nothing has happened. Charlotte. His voice was quiet and direct. 3 hours ago, Tom made a call. The world is different now than it was 3 hours ago. Please let me do this correctly. She pressed her lips together, nodded. He made another call, 30 seconds. Then, we're good. The car belongs to your neighbor. He got home 20 minutes ago. She exhaled so completely she felt her shoulders drop 2 inches. Okay, she said. Okay, let's go. They went up to her apartment, Victor and one other man she hadn't noticed until he appeared beside the car, quiet and compact, and saying nothing, simply present in the way of someone whose entire job description was presence. She let the men move through the apartment without turning on more lights than necessary, went to her bedroom closet. The fireproof box was exactly where she'd left it. She entered the combination, her mother's birthday, the same combination she'd used on every lock since she was 19 years old, and opened it. And there, underneath her passport, underneath her birth certificate, was the USB drive. Small, black, unlabeled. She picked it up, held it in her palm. 14 months. She had been carrying something she didn't know the weight of for 14 months. She walked back out and held it out to Victor. He looked at it, then at her. "I need your permission to look at what's on this," he said. She almost laughed. Of all the moments to ask permission. "You have it," she said. He took it from her hand. His fingers didn't touch hers in the exchange. He was careful about that. She noticed, careful in a way that felt deliberate, like someone who had decided that certain lines existed and intended to maintain them, regardless of what the circumstances made possible. He handed the drive to the man beside him, who produced a laptop from somewhere with the ease of someone who carries laptops the way other people carry wallets, and they stood in the Charlotte's living room and waited. 40 seconds. The man looked at Victor. Something passed between them. Victor looked down at the screen, and Charlotte watched his face change. Not collapse. Victor Moretti's face didn't collapse. But she watched something move through his features in a sequence she could read even without knowing him well. Recognition, then confirmation, then something she could only describe as the specific gravity of a man who has just found something much larger than he expected. "What is it?" she said. Victor looked up at her. "Everything," he said. The words sat in the air between them. "The full transaction record," he said. "Every account, every transfer, every name. Not just Tom's debt to my family, everything surrounding it. Business partners, intermediaries, 2 other families besides mine." He paused. "This drive is not a personal backup, Charlotte. Tom didn't give this to you for safekeeping. He gave it to you because it was the safest place he could think of, somewhere no one would ever think to look for something this sensitive." Charlotte stared at him. "He hid it in me," she said. "Yes. He used me as a safe deposit box." "Yes. For information that if the wrong people knew she had it, would be extremely dangerous," Victor said quietly. "Yes." She sat down on her couch. Not gracefully, she sat the way a person sits when their legs have made a unilateral decision. She put her hands over her face for exactly 5 seconds. Then she took them down. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" Victor crouched down in front of her. Not kneeling, not performing concern, just bringing himself level with her so she wasn't looking up at him. And he said, "You don't go back to this apartment tonight." Charlotte opened her mouth. "Not forever," he said. "Not even for long. But tonight, this drive changes what you are to certain people, and we need 24 hours to control that before those people have a chance to act on it." She looked at him. "I'm not in danger," she said, and she said it the way you say something you're testing for truth rather than stating. Victor held her eyes. "You were never supposed to be," he said. "I intend to make sure of it." And Charlotte Winters, who had spent 3 years trusting the wrong man and 0 time trusting herself, looked at Victor Moretti crouched in front of her in her living room at 1 a.m. with a USB drive full of secrets between them, and made the calculation she had never in her entire life made before. She decided to trust the man in front of her. Not blindly, not completely, but enough. "All right," she said. "Then let's go." She didn't ask where they were going. That was the thing she noticed about herself, sitting in the back of Victor's car at 1:17 in the morning, with nothing but her purse and her jacket, and the knowledge that 14 months of her life had been used as a hiding place for someone else's crimes she didn't ask. A month ago, a week ago, even 3 hours ago, Charlotte Winters would have asked. Would have needed to know the destination, the timeline, the full itinerary of whatever was happening to her, because control of information was the only control she'd ever reliably had. But right now, in this specific moment, she was so completely emptied out by the events of the night that the questions simply didn't form. She sat. She breathed. She watched the city move past the window, and she let Victor Moretti make the decisions, because she had run entirely out of the energy required to make them herself, and that particular surrender scared her more than anything else that had happened since 9:14 p.m. She was starting to depend on him. She recognized it the way you recognize a symptom, not with surprise, but with the specific dread of someone who has seen this movie before and knows exactly how it ends. You went quiet, Victor said. I'm thinking. About. She turned to look at him. In the dark of the car, his face was half shadow, half the passing light of street lamps, and he looked for the first time since she'd met him tired. Not worn down, not defeated, but the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes of someone who has been managing an enormous amount of things for an enormous amount of time without ever letting any of them show. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that I've been in your company for approximately 4 hours. And in that time, I've told you things I've never told anyone handed you a USB drive full of information that could apparently rearrange the power structure of organized crime in this city and agreed to leave my own apartment in the middle of the night without asking where I'm going. And I'm wondering what that says about me. Victor was quiet for a moment. What do you think it says? That I have very poor judgment about men, she said. Something moved at the edge of his mouth. Or, he said, that your judgment is better than you're finding it credit for, and you know the difference between a situation that's safe and one that isn't. You're not safe, she said. No, he agreed immediately. I'm not, but I'm not a threat to you. Those are different things. Charlotte looked at him. Is there a difference in your world? In my world, Victor said, that distinction is the most important one there is. The car stopped. She looked up. They were in front of a building she didn't recognize, clean, modern, the kind of residential building that has a doorman and no visible signage, and costs exactly as much per month as the absence of both those details implies. My apartment, Victor said, answering the question before she asked it. 16th floor. There are 2 guest rooms. You'll have your own space, your own bathroom, a lock on the door. My housekeeper is there. Her name is Rosa. She's been with my family since before I was born, and she will absolutely make you tea if you ask her. You are not a prisoner. You are not an obligation. You are a guest. That's all. Charlotte looked at the building, then at him. And where will you be? She asked. Working, he said simply. She thought about saying no. She built the sentence in her head. I appreciate everything you've done tonight, but I'll call a friend. I'll get a hotel. I'm not your responsibility. She assembled all the words in the correct order, and she knew if she said them, he would accept them. He had said it himself. She could leave at any point. He had meant it. She was becoming certain that Victor Moretti said exactly what he meant 100% of the time, and that this was both his most valuable quality and in ways she couldn't fully articulate, yet his most frightening one. She didn't say no. Okay, she said. One night, he agreed. Yeah. Rosa was exactly what Victor had described, small, dark-haired, somewhere in her 60s, with the efficient warmth of someone who has spent decades managing complicated households and complicated men and has arrived at a place of complete, unshakable competence about both. She showed Charlotte to a guest room with the matter-of-fact kindnesses of someone who has done this before, asked once if she needed anything, accepted the answer of no thank you, without pushback, and left a glass of water and a spare phone charger on the nightstand without being asked. Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room of Victor Moretti's apartment at 1:45 in the morning and tried to locate somewhere in the wreckage of the day the woman she had been at 7 p.m. when she'd driven to the Harrington estate in her catering uniform with nothing more complicated on her mind than getting through the shift. She couldn't find her. That woman was gone, not destroyed. Charlotte didn't feel destroyed, which surprised her, but gone. The way a version of yourself goes when something permanent has happened and the old shape simply doesn't fit anymore. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. The attorney will be at the Moretti office at 9 a.m. Her name is Sandra Reeves. She has no connection to the family. Her record is clean. You can verify independently. Her firm is Reeves and Park Michigan Avenue. I'd encourage you to look her up tonight. V. Charlotte stared at the text. He had thought of this, the independent verification, the encouragement to look her up herself before she had. He had anticipated her skepticism and built the answer to it into the message before she'd even asked the question. She looked up Sandra Reeves on her phone. Clean record. 14 years in financial fraud litigation. 3 published cases involving coerced signatory fraud. No visible connection to anyone named Moretti. Charlotte set her phone down. She lay back on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep for a long time. At 6:45 in the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Victor's voice somewhere in the apartment, low rapid in that language. The one she'd decided overnight was almost certainly Sicilian-inflected Italian, spoken by someone who had learned it before they learned English, and still defaulted to it under pressure. She lay still for 30 seconds, listening to the cadence of it, not the words which she couldn't parse, but the rhythm. He was not happy. The control was still there, the evenness, but underneath the evenness, something had tightened. She got up. She splashed water on her face. She found Rosa in the kitchen and accepted coffee without pretending she didn't desperately need it, and she was on her second cup when Victor appeared in the doorway. He looked exactly as he had last night, same suit, same stillness, same face. He had either not slept, or he was the kind of person who looked identical, whether he had slept or not, and she was not surprised to find that both were equally plausible. Tom's lawyer contacted my attorney at 6 a.m., he said without preamble. Tom is disputing the debt restructuring arrangement. He's claiming the original agreement was made under duress and is therefore unenforceable. Charlotte set her coffee cup down. He's trying to get out of the whole thing. He's trying to buy time, Victor said, which means he's more desperate than I estimated, which means he knows the drive is gone from your apartment and he knows we have it. How could he know that already? Because someone told him, Victor said. And the way he said it, the particular flatness of it, told Charlotte that the someone was already known, an already identified, already a solved problem in a way she probably didn't want the details of. What does this mean for the 72 hours, she asked. It accelerates things. He poured himself coffee with the efficiency of a man who performs small domestic actions the way he performs all other actions without wasted motion. The meeting with Sandra Reeves is still at 9. That doesn't change, but there's something else that needs to happen first. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. Rosa had quietly disappeared. Tom is going to go public, Victor said. Charlotte blinked. What do you mean public? He's going to try to get ahead of this. A story probably through one of the financial press contacts he has that paints him as a victim of predatory lending by organized crime. In that story, you're either absent entirely or you're presented as a knowing accomplice who helped him manage the borrowed funds. The coffee in Charlotte's stomach went cold. He's going to throw me to the press, she said. He's going to try, Victor said. Before 9 a.m. we have a window, a narrow one. A window for what? For you to tell your story first. Charlotte stared at him. You want me to go to the press? I want you to go to one specific Barnextaman, he said. Her name is Diana Cho. She covers financial crime for the Tribune. She has been investigating Tom Harrison independently for 7 months. She has most of the picture, but she's been missing the connective tissue, the documents, the intermediaries, the full transaction chain. What's on that drive gives her everything she's been looking for. And in exchange, she tells my side of the story. In exchange, she tells the truth, Victor said, which happens to be your side of the story. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee cup in her hands around and around, the warmth of it against her palms. And where does your family land in a story like that? Victor held her gaze. We're not the subject of her investigation. The drive implicates Tom and his associates. My family's connection to Tom is documented, but Diana has agreed in writing to focus her story on the fraud rather than the creditors. You've already spoken to her, Charlotte said. Not accusingly, just recognizing the shape of it. Last night, he confirmed, while you were sleeping. She absorbed this, the fact that while she'd been lying on a borrowed pillow trying to locate the woman she used to be, Victor had been working. Making calls, arranging pieces, building a structure around the situation that would hold. She absorbed it, and she did the honest thing, which was to acknowledge that she didn't know entirely how she felt about it. You move fast, she said. The alternative was waiting and letting Tom move first, he said. I chose not to wait. Did you think about asking me before you called her? A pause, one beat. Yes, he said, and I decided that the hour I would have spent waiting for you to wake up was an hour Tom's attorney was using. I made a call. If it was the wrong call, it wasn't wrong, Charlotte said. She said it before she'd fully finished deciding it, which was itself a kind of answer about where she was. It wasn't wrong, She stopped, started again. I need to be part of these decisions. Going forward, whatever this is, I need to be a participant, not something that's being protected. Victor looked at her steadily. You're right, he said. I understand. Because I spent 3 years being managed by someone who thought he knew better than me what I needed, and I am not. Her voice tightened slightly. She pressed it flat. I am not doing that again. I hear you, Victor said, and he said it the way he said things, directly, without decoration, without the performative sincerity that means nothing. It won't happen again. She looked at him, at the steadiness of his face. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Rosa reappeared with toast, which Charlotte ate because she was starving, and also because Rosa put it in front of her with an expression that suggested declining was not genuinely an option. Sandra Reeves was 53, silver-haired, and had the demeanor of someone who has spent 14 years watching people lie under oath and has developed an absolute, finely calibrated radar for it. She shook Charlotte's hand with the directness of someone who has no use for social cushioning, sat across from her at a conference table in a building on Michigan Avenue that had nothing to do with the Moretti name, and said, "Tell me everything. Don't edit it. Don't decide what's relevant. Start with the parking garage and go from there." Charlotte told her everything. It took 51 minutes. Sandra didn't interrupt except twice, once to clarify a date, once to ask for the specific language Tom had used when he described the fourth document. She wrote, constantly filling pages in a yellow legal pad with the focused economy of someone for whom no detail is too small to record. When Charlotte finished, Sandra looked at her notes for a long moment. Then she looked up. "The notary," she said. "You said his name was given to you as Patrick Greer." "That's what Tom told me." "Patrick Greer has been dead for 6 years, Sandra said flatly. Charlotte heard the words and felt them arrive in sequence, first the sound, then the meaning, then the full implication. "He used a dead man's name," Charlotte said. "His documents have a stolen notary seal," Sandra said. "This is not the first time this particular seal has appeared in fraud cases in this city. I've seen it twice before. Both times it led back to the same source." She closed her notepad. "Charlotte, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you need direct right now." "Please," Charlotte said. "What Tom Harrison did is prosecutable, clearly, specifically prosecutable. The pattern of coercion, the false notarization, the fraudulent transfer of signatory authority, this is not a gray area. This is a case." She paused. "But cases take time, and Tom Harrison knows people, and before a case is built, there is a period of vulnerability during which he can do significant damage to your name if he chooses to." "He's already choosing to," Charlotte said. Sandra nodded, "which is why the Tribune story matters. Not because the press is the legal remedy, it isn't, but because it controls the narrative during the window before the legal process catches up." Charlotte thought about Tom's voice on the phone last night, the tightness in it, the calculations she could hear underneath every word. "He's going to deny everything," she said. "Of course," Sandra said, "but denial requires credibility. And once Diana Cho's story runs with the transaction records, with the notary fraud, with your account of the circumstances, his credibility becomes the story, not yours." "When does it run?" "She told me this morning she's pushing for tomorrow's edition," Sandra said. "She had most of it already. What the drive gave her was the last third of the architecture." Charlotte sat with that for a moment. Tomorrow, in 24 hours, her name would be in the Tribune in connection with financial fraud, and the question was only whether she was described as a victim or a participant. And the answer to that question was apparently being decided right now in the next 12 hours by the speed at which 2 women and one entirely too controlled man could outmaneuver a desperate man in an expensive suit. "What do I do right now?" Charlotte asked. "Right now," Sandra said, "you write down every document you can remember in as much detail as possible. Date, location, signatories, present what you were told it was. We'll cross-reference with what's on the drive and build a timeline. Then tomorrow morning before the story runs, I file a preemptive motion to establish your status as a defrauded party in any potential proceeding." She stood, offered her hand. "He spent 3 years setting this up, Charlotte. We have 24 hours to take it apart. Let's not waste them." Charlotte shook her hand. She did not think about whether this was the right decision. She had made the decision. She was done renegotiating it. Victor was waiting outside the building. He fell into step beside her without ceremony, without asking how it went, because he had apparently read the answer in her face before she'd finished coming through the door. "Good," he said. "Good," she said. They walked half a block in silence. Chicago in March was cold with the specific insistence of a city that intends to still be winter. Regardless of what the calendar says, and Charlotte had her jacket pulled tight and her hands in her pockets, and she was walking faster than usual because fast felt right, felt like the only appropriate speed for what was happening. "Tom called my direct line," Victor said, 20 minutes ago. Charlotte stopped walking. Victor stopped beside her. "What did he say?" she said. "He made an offer," Victor said. "He said he would sign the statement, the one exonerating you from the document fraud, if I pulled the drive from Diana Cho's investigation and agreed to give him 6 more months on the debt." She stared at him. She processed it. "He's trading my exoneration as a bargaining chip. He'll clear my name, but only if you protect him." "Yes," Victor said. "What did you say?" Victor looked at her. "I told him I'd call him back." Charlotte blinked. "Why you didn't, Victor? You cannot seriously be considering—" "I'm not considering it," he said with the particular patience of someone who has been waiting for the sentence to finish. "I called him back 30 seconds later, and I told him no. I told him that Charlotte Winter's name was going to be cleared whether he signed the statement or not, and that the only choice he was making with his offer was whether he exited this situation with anything left or nothing." Charlotte stood on the sidewalk in the March cold and looked at Victor Moretti. She thought about the word he had used at the party. Mine. She thought about what she'd said to him last night. I need to know what that actually meant, and the answer he'd given her, whatever you choose it to mean. "You didn't take the deal," she said, "even though it would have resolved the debt faster." "No." "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because the deal required using you as currency, and that's not something I'm willing to do." The wind came off the lake, and Charlotte felt it sharp and clean, and she thought about Tom's hands on her elbow, steering her through the crowd, the casual, total assumption of access. She thought about 3 years of being useful, being convenient, being the person who signed what she was given and held what she was handed and never asked the right questions. She thought about Victor, who had walked into that ballroom and looked at her in the worst moment of her life and said, "She's mine, not to own her." She understood that now, but to draw a line, to put himself between her and the thing that was hurting her. "Tom is going to escalate," she said. Not a question. "Probably," Victor agreed. "He's running out of moves. Desperate people escalate." "What does that look like for someone like him?" "It could mean lawyers," Victor said. "It could mean press of his own. It could mean he reaches out to people beyond the ones he's already contacted." He paused. "It could mean he tries to get to you directly." Charlotte absorbed this. "He wouldn't." "He called you last night from the party," Victor said. "That was already direct." She thought about Tom's voice on the phone. "You don't know what you're doing," the tightness in it, the calculation. "I know," she said quietly. They started walking again. A block passed. Then Victor said, "There's something else." She looked at him sideways. The something else in his voice had weight. "My family wants to meet you," he said. Charlotte stopped walking again. "Excuse me?" "My uncle," he said. "Enzo Moretti. He runs the family's business operations. He became aware of your situation last night, the full situation, the Drive the Tribune story, and he's requested a meeting." "Requested," she repeated. "Or required," Victor paused. "The distinction is meaningful to me," he said. "In my family, it is less meaningful to others." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a lot of things very quickly, about what it meant to be summoned by someone named Enzo Moretti, about what it meant that Victor was telling her, rather than simply producing the meeting, about the careful way he'd said requested, and then immediately honestly qualified it. "What does he want?" she said. "He wants to assess you," Victor said simply. "The drive you had, the information on it, has altered the position of several people, including within my family. My uncle wants to know who you are." "Because I'm either an asset or a liability," Charlotte said. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "In his framing, yes. And in yours." He looked at her, and for the second time since she had known him, since the parking garage anecdote, since the sentence about his mother that he had opened and immediately closed, she saw something move across his face that was entirely genuinely unguarded. "In mine," he said, You're a person who was put in an impossible situation by someone who should have protected you. And everything I've done since last night has been about making sure you come out the other side of it intact." Charlotte held his gaze. She felt the weight of the statement settle over her. Not like a net, not like a trap, but like something she could actually stand under. Like something that was offered freely and asked nothing back. "Your uncle," she said. "When tonight," Victor said, 7 p.m. On my dashing at the friendly house. "And if I say no, I'll tell him you need more time," Victor said. "He won't like it, but I'll tell him." Charlotte thought about it, thought about Sandra Reeves and the timeline and the Tribune story and the 72 hours that had become 24 and were now becoming something she couldn't measure in hours at all, something that was simply moving fast and forward, and the only choice that mattered was whether she moved with it or got left behind. "I'll go," she said. Something settled in Victor's expression. Relief, she thought, or the closest thing to relief that his face allowed. "There are things you should know before you meet him," Victor said. "Tell me in the car," Charlotte said. "We're burning daylight." For the third time since she had known him, the corner of his mouth moved in that way, the almost smile, the architecture of warmth. "Yes," he said quietly, "we are." And they walked back to the car together, and the city moved around them, and somewhere across Chicago, Tom Harrison was making calculations on borrowed time, and somewhere in a Tribune office, Diana Cho was writing the story that would change everything, and somewhere in a family house Charlotte had never been to a man named Enzo, Moretti was waiting. But right here in this moment on this sidewalk, Charlotte Winters was walking fast and forward and not looking back. And she was beginning to think she might actually survive this. Victor told her 3 things in the car on the way to the Moretti family house, and he told them in the order of importance he'd assigned them, which Charlotte was beginning to understand was how he organized everything by weight, by consequence, by what mattered most and could not be softened by being said last. The first thing, Enzo Moretti was not Victor's uncle in the way most people use that word. He was the man who had raised Victor after Victor's father died when Victor was 11, and the relationship between them was the specific, complicated love of 2 people who had built something together out of necessity and had never entirely agreed on what it should become. The second thing Enzo knew about the documents that drive the Tribune story, he had known since 3 a.m. because Victor had told him, because in the Moretti family there were things you did not let your uncle find out from someone else. The third thing, and this was the one Victor delivered with the particular care of someone choosing each word the way you choose footing on uncertain ground, was that Enzo had not been the one who suggested using Charlotte's documents against her. That had come from a man named Sal Benedetti, who handled certain arrangements on the family's behalf, and who had a philosophy about leverage that Victor described very evenly as, "not my philosophy." "Where is Sal Benedetti now?" Charlotte asked. "He's no longer handling arrangements on the family's behalf," Victor said. Charlotte looked at him, and as of when? As of 4 a.m. this morning. She sat with that. She didn't ask what no longer handling arrangements meant in the specific grammar of Victor Moretti's world, because she was becoming fluent enough in that grammar to know that asking would produce an answer she didn't need and couldn't unknow. "You did that for me," she said. "I did it because it was the right call," Victor said, "and because Sal has been making wrong calls for longer than this situation. But this situation accelerated it." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it did." She turned back to the window. The city was thinning as they moved north, the density of downtown giving way to older neighborhoods with wider streets and houses that had been significant for long enough that they'd stopped needing to announce it. "Why are you telling me these things?" she said. "You could have managed this whole meeting without telling me any of it." "I could have," he said. "So why? Because you told me last night that you needed to be a participant," he said. "And I meant it when I said I understood." Charlotte looked at her hands in her lap, at the steadiness of them, still steady, still not shaking, which continued to surprise her. She had expected at some point in the last 18 hours to collapse, to hit a wall that the adrenaline couldn't carry her past. She kept waiting for it, and it kept not arriving, and she was beginning to think that maybe the wall wasn't coming, that maybe what she had mistaken for fragility in herself over 3 years had actually been the specific exhaustion of fighting the wrong battles. That now that she was fighting the right ones, the body simply knew it and kept going. "Okay," she said, "tell me about Enzo." The Moretti house was not what she'd imagined. She'd built something in her head, On the drive over, something imposing, something that announced itself, and what she found instead was a house that was simply large and old and completely deliberately private. It asked nothing of the street it sat on. It gave nothing away. A man she didn't know opened the door before they reached it. Victor nodded once, and the man stepped aside and they went in. And the inside of the house was warm and smelled of garlic and something baking and old wood, and the specific domestic permanence of a place that has been lived in by the same people for generations. Rosa would have fit here, Charlotte thought. That was her first impression. Not the power, not the money, but the particular weight of a house that takes care of its own. Enzo Moretti was waiting in a room at the back of the house. Not an office, a sitting room with books on 3 walls, and 2 armchairs, and a small table between them bearing a coffee service that had clearly been laid out with intention. He was 70, maybe 72, with Victor's dark coloring and a face that had been handsome for so long, it had simply become something else. Authoritative settled the face of a man who had made every significant decision of his life and made peace with all of them. He stood when they entered. That surprised her. "Ms. Winters," he said and extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was brief and firm and told her nothing. "Sit," he said, not unkindly, just directly. She sat. Victor took a position slightly behind and to the left of her chair, and she noticed it, the geometry of it, the way he had placed himself, and she understood without being told that it was a statement. He was not sitting across from her beside his uncle. He was standing with her. Enzo noticed it too. Something moved through his expression, quick, complicated, filed away. "You've had quite a night," Enzo said and poured coffee with the ease of a man who does not ask whether you want some. "That's one way to describe it," Charlotte said. Something shifted at the edge of Enzo's mouth. "Victor said you were direct. I appreciate direct." He set the coffee in front of her. "I'm going to be direct with you as well. The situation with Tom Harrison and the documents, Victor has handled it in a way I would not have chosen. Not because it was wrong, but because it was slower and more generous than my instinct." "Your instinct being to use the documents against me," Charlotte said. A pause. Enzo looked at her. "That was Sal's recommendation, not mine. But you didn't stop it immediately." Another pause. Longer this time. "No," he said, "I didn't." Charlotte held his gaze. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you would have found out," he said simply, "and I prefer to be the one who tells you." She glanced back at Victor. His face was giving nothing away. She looked back at Enzo. "What do you want from this meeting?" she asked. Enzo leaned back in his chair. He studied her the way a man studies something he is genuinely trying to understand rather than simply evaluate. "I want to know who you are," he said. "Not what Victor thinks you are, and not what Tom Harrison made you into. Who you actually are. And you think 30 minutes of conversation tells you that? I think 30 minutes of watching how someone handles a difficult room tells me most of what I need to know," he said. "You've been in this house for 4 minutes, and you have already told me a significant amount." Charlotte sat very still. "Such as you shook my hand without hesitating," he said. "You sat without checking where Victor was first. You corrected my framing about Sal in your second sentence." He paused. "And you haven't touched the coffee, which means you're being careful about accepting things from me before you know what they cost." Charlotte looked at the coffee cup. Then she picked it up and drank. Enzo watched. Then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. Brief, genuine, the laugh of a man who has been surprised and doesn't mind it. "Victor," he said without looking away from Charlotte, "you were right." "I usually am," Victor said behind her. She could hear just barely the shape of the almost smile in his voice. "About what?" Charlotte said. Enzo looked at her steadily. "He told me you were the kind of person this family doesn't encounter often. Someone who was used badly and came out of it sharper instead of broken." He paused. "I wanted to see it for myself." Charlotte felt something shift in the room, the register of the conversation moving, the evaluation giving way to something more like a beginning. "And," she said, "and Marco," Enzo said, "I owe you an apology for the hours in which Sal's recommendation was on the table, and I did not immediately remove it. In my family, we operate on loyalty. You had done nothing to earn our protection and everything to deserve it, and I allowed a calculation to exist that should not have. I'm sorry." The apology landed with the specific weight of something that cost the person saying it. Charlotte could feel it the way a genuine apology has texture, has friction, unlike the smooth, frictionless versions that cost nothing. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. Enzo nodded, set his cup down, and then said, "Now, the Tribune story runs tomorrow morning." Tom Harrison's attorney filed a counter-narrative with 2 financial outlets this morning trying to preempt Diana Cho's piece. "What I need to know, what concerns me, is what happens to you after tomorrow." Charlotte frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "The story protects you legally," Enzo said. "Sandra Reeves's motion protects you legally, but Tom Harrison is a man with connections and a wounded ego and very little left to lose. Legally clear does not mean safe, and I am asking whether you have people, family, friends, a support structure who can be around you in the days after this becomes public." Charlotte blinked. She had not expected this from Enzo Moretti. She had prepared in the car on the way over for assessment, for negotiation, for some version of, "Here is what we need from you." She had not prepared for someone asking whether she would be okay. "I have a sister," she said. We're not close right now because of Tom." She stopped. "He didn't like her." "Of course he didn't," Enzo said with a flatness that contained a complete verdict on Tom Harrison in 5 words. "I have friends," she said. "I've let some of them go over the last few years, but I have them." Enzo was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she would think about for a very long time afterward, something that arrived without ceremony and settled into her chest with the weight of something true. "Tom Harrison," he said, "is the kind of man who systematically removes the things that make a person strong. Friends, family, self-belief. He does it carefully and slowly, so you don't notice until the architecture is gone and you're standing in an empty building wondering what happened." He paused. "You still have walls, Ms. Winters. That is not nothing. That is in fact quite a lot." Charlotte pressed her lips together, held the feeling that rose up and pressed it flat because she was not going to cry in front of Enzo Moretti on 11 hours of no sleep and 1 cup of borrowed coffee. "I know," she said. Her voice was level. Enzo studied her for one more moment. Then he stood, which she understood was the end of the meeting. She stood as well. "The family will not be named in the Tribune story," he said. "Diana Cho has honored that agreement. In exchange, we have provided certain documents to her investigation through appropriate channels. Tom Harrison will be the subject of the story. You will be identified as a defrauded party." He paused. "This is the outcome I should have been working toward from the moment Sal brought me those documents 6 weeks ago. I regret that it took longer than it should have." Charlotte held his gaze. "Why did it," she said, "take longer?" Enzo looked at her, then almost imperceptibly he looked at Victor, and back at her. "Because Victor was not yet involved," he said simply. In the car going back, Charlotte sat with everything Enzo had said and felt it rearranging something in her chest, not healing it exactly, not yet, because healing was a slower process than 18 hours, but rearranging, putting things back in an order that made sense. Victor was quiet beside her. The city came back around them as they moved south, the density returning, the buildings rising again on either side. "Your uncle is not what I expected," Charlotte said. "He rarely is," Victor said. "He loves you," she said. "It's complicated, but it's real." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "He's also terrifying." "Also yes." She looked at him sideways. "How did you turn out the way you did?" she asked. "In that family with that life. How are you?" She stopped searching for the word. "How am I what he said?" She thought about the notepads and the independent attorney and the coffee he'd let her choose to pick up herself and the deal he'd refused because it required using her as currency. She thought about whatever you choose it to mean, and let's get through right now first, and the way he'd told her 3 hard things in the car and let her decide what to do with each one. "How are you careful," she said, "with people?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then my mother," he said. "She was careful with people, even when the world she lived in wasn't." He paused. "I decided a long time ago that was the thing worth keeping." Charlotte nodded. She didn't push further. She understood the door, and she understood it was open exactly as far as he intended, and she found, with some surprise, that she was content with that. There was time. Whatever this was, there was time. The story runs tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow morning, he confirmed. 6 a.m. online print edition by 8. And Tom Harrison's attorney called Sandra at 2 p.m. by morning. Victor said, he's agreed to sign the statement, the one exonerating you. He wants reduced terms on the debt restructuring in exchange. Charlotte turned to look at him fully. He agreed after everything this morning. The Tribune called him for comment at noon, Victor said, for the story. He had 2 hours to understand what was coming and decide whether he wanted to be in it as a villain with a co-conspirator or a villain alone. He paused. He chose alone. Charlotte felt something release in her chest, a tension so constant she'd stopped registering it as tension and had simply begun to accept it as the baseline of existing. It released all at once like a fist unclenching, and the absence of it was so sudden and complete that she had to press her hand flat against her sternum just to feel where she was. It's over, she said, quietly, testing the words. The worst of it, Victor said. Yes, Tom doesn't... She stopped, started again. He doesn't get to just sign a paper and walk away from this, from everything he did. No, Victor said, he doesn't. The debt restructuring has terms that will occupy the next 4 years of his life. The Tribune story will follow him. Vivian Harrington's family will draw their own conclusions, and they will be the right ones. He paused. He doesn't walk away from this, Charlotte. He walks into it, just without you attached. She sat with that. The justice of it, not the dramatic, explosive justice she might have wanted in the heat of last night, but the slower, more total kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply closes off every exit. Good, she said. Sandra Reeves called at 5:47 p.m. Charlotte was back at Victor's apartment. Rosa had produced food at some point in the afternoon, and Charlotte had eaten it without registering what it was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone and her notepad, and the specific clarifying focus of someone who has found in the middle of catastrophe that she is more capable than she knew. The statement is signed, Sandra said without preamble. Notarized by an actual notary this time. Tom Harrison has attested under penalty of perjury that all 7 documents were obtained without your informed consent under false representation of their nature and purpose. He has acknowledged sole liability for their contents and any legal consequences arising from them. A pause. You're clear, Charlotte. Legally, completely on paper and on record. Charlotte pressed her free hand flat against the table. She breathed in, out. Thank you, she said. Thank yourself, Sandra said. You remembered the parking garage. You remembered the language he used. You gave me the thread and I pulled it. That's how this works. A brief pause. The motion is filed. Your status as a defrauded party is on record. If anything related to those documents ever surfaces in any proceeding, you are protected. Another pause, shorter, warmer. Get some sleep tonight. You've earned it. Sandra hung up. Charlotte set her phone on the table. She sat in the quiet of Victor Moretti's kitchen in the early evening of what had been the longest day of her life, and she felt she took inventory of what she actually felt because she owed herself that honesty. She felt exhausted and clean and very, very hungry, and something else underneath all of it, something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd genuinely forgotten its name. She felt like herself. Not the self that Tom Harrison had slowly edited, not the careful, smaller, convenient version that had spent 3 years making herself easy to manage. The original one, the one that existed before she'd learned to apologize for taking up space. Victor appeared in the doorway. He read her face in the way he always read her face, directly without asking permission and accurately. Done, he said. Done, she said. He sat across from her. Between them on the table there was nothing. No notepad, no phone, no USB drive, no documents. Just the table. Just the two of them in the quiet kitchen, with the city outside the windows and everything that had happened between them in the last 24 hours sitting in the air like weather that has finally decided to break. I need to ask you something, Charlotte said. Ask. Last night, at the party, when you said I was yours. She held his gaze. Was that a decision or was it a reaction? Victor looked at her for a long moment. The stillness in him was different from how it had been at the party, from how it had been in the restaurant. Less controlled somehow, more present. Both, he said. Explain both. A reaction, he said, to watching someone be humiliated in a room full of people who should have said something and didn't. He paused. And a decision because when I walked over and I looked at you, I made a choice about what I was willing to do next. What were you willing to do? Whatever it took, he said, to make sure you were all right. Charlotte held his gaze. She thought about being careful. She thought about patterns, about Tom, and the 3 years and the slow, methodical dismantling, and she thought about how fear of repetition was its own kind of trap, how you could spend so long protecting yourself from the last wound that you stood completely still in the middle of your own life. She was done standing still. I want to be clear about something, she said. Tell me. I am not someone who needs saving, she said. What happened last night, I survived it. I would have survived it without you. Differently and with significantly worse legal exposure, but I would have gotten through it. I know, he said, but I also... She stopped, held the feeling steady. I also think that what you did last night and today, and in the meeting with your uncle, I think it was the most decent thing anyone has done for me in a very long time. And I don't want to walk away from that without saying it directly. Victor was quiet. Something moved through his face, not the almost smile, not the controlled evenness, but something rawer and more real. Something that looked like a man being given something he hadn't asked for and didn't know how to receive. You don't have to, he started. I know I don't have to, she said. That's why I'm saying it. The silence between them settled. Not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has something in it that is full rather than empty, that two people sit inside rather than rush to fill. What happens now, Charlotte said. Utter tomorrow, after the story, after the motion, after all of this. What does the rest of it look like? Victor looked at her steadily. That's up to you, he said. Yet, do you want it to look like? She thought about her apartment, which she would go back to because it was hers, and she had never let anything take what was hers without a fight. She thought about her sister, whose number she had not called in 4 months and intended to call tomorrow. She thought about the toll she was good in, the life she had built, the version of herself that had been there before Tom Harrison and was still there now waiting. And she thought about the man sitting across from her, who was not simple and not safe and not anything she would have chosen deliberately, and she thought about what it meant that she was thinking about him in the same sentence as the rest of her life. I want to have dinner with you, she said. Not in your restaurant after hours, not at a table in a closed room where you've arranged everything. A regular dinner, somewhere I choose. The almost smile arrived, and this time it didn't stop at the edge. It completed itself fully, actually, with something underneath it that was warm and unguarded and absolutely entirely real. Yes, he said. Next week, she said, after I was slept and called my sister and gone back to my apartment and been a normal person for 4 consecutive days. Next week, he agreed. And Victor. She waited until his eyes met hers fully. The next time you make a decision that involves me, you ask me first. Yes, he said, no hesitation. Good, she said. She stood up. She picked up her phone. She was going to call her sister right now tonight before she lost the nerve because some things could not be deferred past the moment of clarity that made them possible. She was at the doorway when Victor said her name. She turned. Charlotte. He looked at her from across the kitchen, steady and real and completely for the first time without any armor at all. I'm glad you walked out of that party last night. She looked at him, at the man who had stepped between her and the worst moment of her life, not to rescue her, but to stand there, to simply stand there, solid and certain, while she found her footing. So am I, she said. She called her sister from the hallway. Her sister answered on the second ring, breathless, startled, and then when she heard Charlotte's voice completely and immediately present in the way that sisters are when they have been waiting. Charlotte, her sister said. Are you okay? Yes, Charlotte said, and the word was true in every direction she pointed it, the full, real, unedited truth. Tell me everything, her sister said. And Charlotte Winters, who had walked into the worst night of her life, holding someone else's champagne, and walked out of it holding her own, stood in the hallway of a complicated man's apartment and started talking, and for the first time in 3 years, every word she said was exactly her own. The Tribune story ran at 6 the next morning. Tom Harrison's engagement was called off by noon, and Charlotte had already moved on, not because the wound wasn't real, but because she had decided with the particular clarity of someone who has stood in the rubble of what someone else built and found herself still standing, that the wound did not get to be the last word. She was.